Hello everyone, welcome back to another stream. Hope you're doing well as always. So, on last night's stream, we watched a couple videos, with the first by Zach Magnus called Dream Death Dragons, Elden Ring Theory. Then we watched Miss Chalice's We Need to Talk About the Hornsent, Elden Ring DLC lore. Then finished with Abdomina's Why Taking Risks Matters in Game Design. So tonight, we have a couple videos queued up, with the first by Occam's Onion, with Marika's Ascension was not legitimate, and it explains everything Elden Ring lore. And we didn't get to this one last night because we spent a lot more time on the prior two videos than I expected. So after this one, we'll take a look at Sinclair lore's Miquella and cult psychology with a troubled maker. So, hope you're all doing well. Joji Poji, Ask the Next, Galaxy Dragon, our Crusader, Jake, Iron Lung, how is it going? Alright, so let's go ahead and dive on into this. When was this made? A month ago. Okay, so after the DLC. And Pesto de Besto, nice to see you again. Have I reacted to the new Center Tarnished videos yet? I have not.
Oh. There is something about Marika's Ascension that just doesn't make sense. And it's all because of this new piece.
That is certainly one way to open up a video. It kind of sucks that everyone more or less seems to be on the same page with that. So let's see why it wasn't legitimate in Occam Onion's opinion.
Piece of information about Marika and the two fingers that guided her. According to Count Ymir, Marika and the two fingers are said to be unhinged and broken. Even for Matter, the mother of fingers, who is said to be the cleaning daughter of the Greater Will, she too is said to be broken and abandoned. Indeed, the fingers are apparently abandoned by the Greater Will. And if Marika was under the guidance of the two fingers, then do you see the problem? How did Marika manage to ascend in the first place? Isn't it said that the fingers have been abandoned by the Greater Will because of their flaws? And you see, it is even said that Matter has been trying to contact the Greater Will ever since she was abandoned, and that she has since been waiting for another message to come, meaning there was never any. Even more perplexing is we know for a fact that the Greater Will did send the Elden Stars to the lands between, and Marika did.
For what it's worth, that is written as hearsay, but considering that we've gotten Metter as the little bit of a mediary between those 2 points, I don't really think it's that big of an issue anymore. Although the timeline of when exactly the Elden Stars landed is certainly perplexing in relation to Metter. If she was a star that predated the Golden Star bearing the beast, there is also the potential that the Golden Star could have coincided with Metter's arrival, in that it was all one entity, and then maybe the beast split off from Metter later on. I am very willing to entertain that as well.
Greater Will did send the Elden Stars to the lands between, and Marika did become a god for the Greater Will and the Golden Order later. So, how do we make sense of all these? What has caused the Greater Will not only to change his mind, but also respond to the long-abandoned fingers, and even more so, entertain them by ascending Marika, their chosen, despite the fact that she herself is also said to be unhinged? And
this isn't really relevant to too much here, but I was just kind of looking at Metter's design right here. Yeah, it just doesn't really work. I was kind of wondering if it was a little bit analogous to the idea of the way that Marika pulls out the threads. So if you assume like this would be the wrist portion going into like two hands clasping over something, I wondered if that was relevant to the way that the spiral incants are supposed to have people like crossing their arms when they do their prayers, but I don't really think it works because these are more fingers as a tail. So anyway,
respond to the long-abandoned fingers, and even more so, entertain them by ascending Marika, their chosen, despite the fact that she herself is also said to be unhinged. And wouldn't this conflict with the information that the Greater Will never responded to matter? Or was it because the Greater Will only responded to Marika and the Two Fingers, so that doesn't really count? Well, no. And the answer to this conundrum would allow us to paint a picture so clear that we will reveal the secrets of Marika's ascension, the birth of the Erdtree, the reason behind its short-lived Age of Plenty, the secrets of the last Elden Ring, the purpose of the Elden Beast, the meaning of fundamentalism of the Golden Order, the reason behind the removal of destined death, and finally, the birth of the tarnished warriors. But no, Marika's ascension.
Yep, that's no small task. Good luck with that. Just solve everything with one throw. And I'm not saying that to be like too skeptical or dismissive. It's just he's kind of right in many ways. I think where if you solved just like one final link in the chain, you could probably end up painting that full picture after all. So we'll just have to see how well this goes. And a lot of what a person interprets for one thing can have a lot of impacts further on down the line. So even if they present something which might make sense at first, there could always be some implications of that which might not have been totally expected. So I'm very curious to see where we go with this. And then Phantom Leaves and Corn, welcome back in. Sorry, Corn, I feel that.
The initial one we saw in the trailer was not a legitimate one. While it was the gold once belonged to the Greater Will, it was not the gold of the Golden Order, at least.
Oh, that's funny, because I was about to ask if he thinks the illegitimate ascension could coincide with Radagon's ascension, because I could make sense of that title claim with this idea that this could be like Radagon's rise, but anyway. It's so annoying that YouTube does this and I have to double click out, then double click back in.
And to paint you this picture, we must first step back a little and start with the most obvious question. What are the golden threads we saw Marika use in the trailer? And do we have more information now after the DLC? Well, we do. You see, to know what those golden threads are, we must first ask, what did Marika achieve with the golden thread? A question that is actually already answered by the trailer. An affair from which gold arose, and so too was shadow born. What Marika absolutely achieved with golden thread there is the creation of the Shadow Tree. I think many of us here, myself included, have wondered if the Shadow Tree is the Crucible, simply because we know the Hornsents worship the Crucible and the Shadow Tree is located in their realm. But this idea can be quite easily dispelled, because
so before he dispels that idea, I will say there is some more ancillary support for it depending on how one feels about the creatures in the realm of Shadow being more touched by the Crucible. I could definitely understand why people would think there should be more of a connection because of that. And then, hey, operator, welcome back to the stream. How's it going?
the Shadow Tree really is just a shadow of the Erdtree. Well, how can I be so sure? Because we know for a fact that the Erdtree itself, the one we have in Leyndell on Altus Plateau, was once the Crucible. As the description of Godskin Noble wrote mentioned, not unlike the Crucible, the Erdtree in primordial form, or as the Crucible Tree armor mentioned, the armor holds the power of the Crucible of Life, the primordial form of the Erdtree. So the Shadow Tree really is just the shadow of the Erdtree. But now comes the real question. When was the Erdtree created then? Was it created?
I'm really interested at where he's going with this, because I wasn't expecting him to state so plainly that he believes the Crucible literally was the Erdtree in its primordial form. And the way that he's making it sound now is he makes it sound as though it is the legitimate Erdtree as we know of it, rather than something completely different. Although maybe that's just a little bit reading too deeply into things for me right now. And then Jack Irish, welcome back in.
It at the time of the trailer as well? Indeed, it logically follows so. What Gold the Rose refers to is exactly the birth of the Erdtree. But we know the Erdtree wasn't simply created out of thin air. It had a primordial form known as the Crucible. So what Marika really did there in the trailer, you see, was transforming the Crucible into the Erdtree, which in turn created the Shadow Tree, veiling the Hornsents in their land in shadow. Marika literally took the Crucible away from the Hornsents and transformed it into her own faith, sealed them away, and started a war against all factions in the lands between. Now,
So I'm curious, because the way that's presented right now does make it sound more like the Shadow Tree should kind of align with the Crucible, or at least with the Erdtree stuff. So if she took away their Crucible, is he trying to say that there was something completely different to both the Shadow Tree and the Erdtree? I'm a little bit confused. Not necessarily because of like any fault of their own, but just because there's kind of multiple ways this can be taken, I think.
Now, if this isn't enough to convince you, remember that the Erdtree was said to be once perfect and eternal, and you know what else is also eternal? The Dragon Lord Placidusax, the Elden Lord of the last Elden Ring, was also said to be eternal and...
So I like this idea to an extent, but I dislike it more in that... Damn it. Can't I just... Okay, there we go. In that... If we want to say that the Erdtree was once perfect and eternal, and then tie that perfect and eternal epoch to the one before the Erdtree, I feel like we have a little bit of a crisis of identity in what the item descriptions are referring to. And so this doesn't discount the idea, and this could just kind of come all the way down to bad writing, unfortunately. So I'm typically against stuff like this because it creates a lot of problems trying to read into what one thing means if it has multiple meanings, which, you know, good luck with that in Elden Ring, you know. But I do feel like this is a bit of a contradiction to say that the Erdtree was once perfect and eternal, and then to imply that it had a different form before it was the Erdtree, and that that thing should have also been called the Erdtree. So I feel like there should be a definite break before, I guess, what we'll call the Crucible for now and the Erdtree. And so if the Crucible was once perfect and eternal, I dislike it being referred to retroactively as like the Erdtree, I guess.
was said to be once perfect and eternal, and you know what else is also eternal? The Dragon Lord Placidusax, the Elden Lord of the last Elden Ring, was also said to be eternal and beyond time. When asked what the Elden Ring is, Miyazaki-san explained in an interview that the Elden Ring is a mysterious concept that defines the world. While this sounds all rather abstract, we can at least infer from it that an Elden Ring is basically a set of concepts or laws that a world and its being are defined and operate by. Now, Placidusax was said to be the Elden Lord of the previous Elden Ring, an Elden Ring that looks rather different to that of ours. Therefore, it would be safe to assume that the previous Elden Ring would also have a set of concepts or laws that are more or less different to those of ours. And since Placidusax is a being of the previous Elden Ring, that would mean he had to also be defined by those concepts and laws as well. And because of that...
So about that, I am a little bit skeptical about this, just because we're told that the Erdtree, or was it the Elden Ring? Let me look at protection of the Erdtree again. It became the embodiment of order only after war and conflict, essentially. In the beginning, everything was in opposition to the Erdtree, but through countless victories in war, it became the embodiment of order. Now, to be fair, the Erdtree is distinct from the Elden Ring, and there might be some interplay with that. However, with the Erdtree still kind of being governed, essentially, or powered by the Elden Ring, The fact that it wasn't the embodiment of order, to me, shows that the Elden Ring itself didn't necessarily have that much exertion over the order in the past and was probably strengthened over time, but I could be wrong about that. So, long story short, even if Placidus Axe did have the Elden Ring back in the day, it might have been weaker and not had as much power as it does now.
We are able to identify at least one concept or law of the last Elden Ring, and that would be the allowing for eternal life. Placidus Axe was said to be able to dwell eternally beyond time, and in fact, it is not just him. All ancient dragons are said to have stony scale and are described as living rocks. And if these don't sound immortal enough for you, the description of the dragon halberd says that the dragonkin soldier never attain immortality. They are a pale imitation of their skyborn kin, which can only be referring to the ancient dragons who possess such immortality. Indeed, all ancient dragons are immortal. They are eternal and beyond time simply because one concept or law of the last Elden Ring defined it so. And it would also be this very concept that we defined the Crucible and transformed it into the Erdtree. Yes, what Marika did in the trailer was redefining and transforming the Crucible with the power of the last Elden Ring, or at least what remains of it. And yes, the golden threads Marika used were the remnants of the last Elden Ring, similar to the broken Great Rune of Miquella we found, but not as broken and powerful enough for the plan of Marika and the two fingers that guided her in all this. And this is why the Erdtree was said to be perfect and eternal once, because it really was, due to the very thing it was transformed with. Now, if this still couldn't convince you, then let's pretend we haven't heard any of this and take a little step back here. Remember that we discussed at the start of the video, it just doesn't add up the greater will would respond to the two fingers after abandoning them for so long, and even more so, entertain them by ascending a person they have chosen to be his god? Well, he really didn't. In fact, Marika's ascension in the trailer was not even legitimate. Do you remember Marika was also described to be unhinged as well by Ymir? While Ymir did elaborate later that the fault is on Matter, the mother of the fingers, for presumably giving birth to the unhinged fingers, it would still be them that were guiding Marika. And most importantly, what still doesn't change here is the lack of order in Marika's reign as a god. What do I mean by that? As we have discussed, the Shadow Tree was essentially created by Marika. And according to the remembrance of his avatar, the Shadow Tree was born of dark notions that bear no sense of order. That's right, of Marika's dark notions that bear no sense of order. And this would not be the only description that suggests so. The minor Erdtree incantation also mentions only the kindness of gold without order. Now, while this paints Marika instead in a more positive light, the point is that even when Marika's gold is kind, it still lacks order. So what does order even mean? Well, have you noticed order in both cases are spelled with a capital O, like the order in Golden Order? Correct. While Marika had an affair to which gold arose, it was in fact the gold from the previous cycle. The same gold that imbued the lightning of the ancient dragons and their breaths. The gold...
Wait, hold on. Let me catch that last part again.
had an affair to which gold arose. It was in fact the gold from the previous cycle. The same gold that imbued the lightning of the ancient dragons and their breaths. The gold of the last Elden Ring. Not the gold of the Golden Order. While gold indeed arose there at the time of the trailer, that was no Golden Order. But of course, that was until the Greater Will sends the Elden Stars to the...
Hold on, I am a little bit confused. Maybe you guys caught it a little bit differently than I did, but it sounds like he's saying the gold being born here was the gold during Placidus Axe's reign, which that kind of contradicts the concept of birth, I feel, to a degree. So, let's just watch it again.
Gold from the previous cycle. the same goal that
Let me back it up a little bit further.
order in both cases are spelled with a capital O, like the order in Golden Order? Correct. While Marika had an affair to which gold arose, it was in fact the gold from the previous cycle, the same gold.
So he is saying that the gold that arose was the previous gold, okay?
Gold that imbued the lightning of the ancient dragons and their breaths, the gold of the last Elden Ring, not the gold of the Golden Order. While gold indeed arose there at the time of the trailer, that was no Golden Order. But of course, that was until the Greater Will sends the Elden Stars to the lands between later, bearing a new Elden Ring and a beast that is literally said to be the living incarnation of the concept of order.
Ooh, so this is a bit of a departure. So the rest of the video is really good in terms of like staying really grounded to the text. I'm not sure that I would agree with a second Elden Ring being sent, although that's kind of an interesting idea. That could potentially solve a lot of problems if one were to think that Metter and Placidusax had an Elden Ring that is separate from the current version. Hey, would that solve problems? Let me think about this. I kind of don't want to think about it. It sounds like a headache. And then Elden, nice to see you again. There's only one. It was in Fair Missoula. So based on what he's saying, it might sound as though the Fair Misulan Elden Ring could be a different thing entirely, but I feel like that might cause even more problems, because then what would have happened to it? Yeah, hold
Between
on.
later, bearing a new Elden Ring and a beast that is literally said to be the living incarnation of the concept of order.
Yeah, so this makes it sound like Marika has the Elden Ring before the Elden Beast even arrives, which, unless we get more information and make that stick, just sounds completely contradicted by the fact that the Elden Beast is within her. So unless you want to make the claim that like the Elden Beast is kind of like Radagon and he kind of entered her or something like that, I really don't know how you can reconcile these ideas. Yeah, let me just back up to the timestamp over here again. And then, hey, Methoda, nice to see you again. Phantom Leaves is not sure about the two Elden Rings, but gold being a constant through the ages does ring true for you at least. So it isn't so much about gold being constant as much as it is like the story trailers stating that it was the birth of gold, which, if it's a certain kind of gold, I'm fine with. If gold in this context is a reference to the grace of gold, I'm fine with, like, even if it's a metaphor. But to say that it's the like gold of Placidusax in this age just doesn't seem to work to me quite as well as an idea to coincide with the terminology about birthing gold as well as shadow.
But of course, that was until the Greater Will sends the Elden Stars to the lands between later, bearing a new Elden Ring and...
Alright, so I need to back it up further than the timestamp apparently. Let's go here.
What does order even mean? Well, have you noticed order in both cases are spelled with a capital O, like the order in Golden Order? Correct. While Marika had an affair to which gold arose, it was in fact the gold from the previous cycle, the same gold that imbued the lightning of the ancient dragons and their breaths, the gold of the last Elden Ring, not the gold of the Golden Order. While gold indeed arose there at the time of the trailer, that was no Golden Order. But of course, that was until the Greater Will sends the Elden Stars to the lands between later, bearing a new Elden Ring and a beast that is literally said to be the living incarnation of the concept of order. The very thing Marika's goal badly needed, at least in the eyes of the Greater Will. Indeed, the Erdtree was once perfect and eternal in the beginning, as it was transformed under the power and concept of the last Elden Ring, by Marika's hand and under the guidance of the Two Fingers. And yes, Marika's ascension at first was not legitimate, as the Greater Will never responded to them there. But once the last Elden Ring, which also belongs to the Greater Will, is used by Marika to ascend without his approval, and on top of the fact that Marika and the fingers that guided her are unhinged and have no qualities of order, which I'll explain what they are in a bit, the Greater Will had to respond and send a new ring, as the last one is broken to threads, and also send the Elden Beast, who literally is the concept of order, to reign in Marika, who apparently lacks order. Simply put, what the Greater Will was doing was basically, I did not approve your ascension and order more using my last broken ring, but ascend you did, so you gotta do it right and do it my way. Now, it is important to stress that the Erdtree was indeed eternal for an age.
So about this idea in general here, I feel like that kind of gets contradicted by what Empyreans are kind of set up to be. Now, there could be this whole conspiracy theory that an Empyrean isn't necessarily ordained by the Greater Will, and there might be some, like, rather human element to it, I guess, but then that also becomes a lot more messy when you consider how the Two Fingers ordained the Empyreans with their own beasts and whatnot. But then again, if the whole argument is contingent on the Two Fingers being broken and not receiving guidance from the Greater Will, then I guess we're just kind of have to be at an impasse then. And then Phantom Leaves says, that's fair in relation to the gold comments. You guess you interpret the story trailer to mean the golden age of the Erdtree, but we know what the Crucible was also affiliated with gold. So, right. I definitely do think, well, actually, I don't know if I do think that's, yeah, I'll just leave that alone. And then Joji Poji says, order may have become golden, but the form and understanding of order was another way with the other Elden Rings? Hold on, I don't understand this. A world with beasts and dragons has a very different order than humanity. Hold on. So yeah, as far as your comment goes, I would disagree with the concept of other Elden Rings. And of course that's a little bit arguable, especially depending on how one reads the Japanese description of Miquella's circlet in particular. But yeah, I'll just have to digress for now.
Remember, it's called the Age of Plenty? Yes, it lasted for an age, at least, before the new Elden Ring arrived and redefined it, considering the Greater Will is so far away in the universe, and as the staff of the Great Beyond suggests, he is from beyond the microcosm, and it would likely take some light years of distance for him to send the Elden Stars to the lands between, or do any type of response at all. As for the Elden Beast, who is said to be the very concept of order, he is there to literally make up for Marika's lack of order, to make sure her reign would properly align with what the Golden Order stands for, which we will also explain in a bit. Therefore, the Elden Stars was not sent at the moment of the trailer to ascend Marika. It was sent after to not only legitimize her, but to also rein her in, turning her from simply a god of gold to a god of the Golden Order, a puppet god of the Greater Will. So now comes the question, how is the concept of the new Elden Ring different to the last one, that when the Erdtree was redefined, it would no longer be eternal life but instead an object of faith? And while the Elden Beast was literally the concept of order, what exactly does order mean? Well, you see, the Greater Will did not send a new Elden Ring simply because the last one was broken. As I said, the new ring has concepts different to those of the last in how it defines the world and its beings. And with the eternal life of the Erdtree came to an end and slowly became more an object of faith, we can safely assume that the new Elden Ring doesn't have such a concept or law. In fact, the Fundamentalism described the Golden Order through one law that may just be entirely opposed to the idea of eternal life. And that law would be the law of regression. Yes, you guessed it. The rise of fundamentalism in the Golden Order is no accident. It described the Golden Order through the power of regression and causality, and these two powers are in fact the world-defining concept or laws of the new Elden Ring. None existed in the last. But what does regression and causality mean? According to the law of regression's incantation, regression is the pool of meaning, that all things yearn to eternally converge. Now, while this sounds very profound and philosophical, we don't have to overthink this. It is the regression to the cause of the first cause, the beginning of the universe. According to Ymir, the universe was created by the greater will through a great rupture, a Big Bang if you will. Yes, the Big Bang Theory.
I, too, am a glintstone sorcerer. We study the stars and examine the life therein. Are you familiar with our findings? Long ago, we began as stardust, born of a great rupture far across the skies. We, too, are children of the greater will. Is that not divine? Is that not sublime? And yet, none can fathom its implications. Its utter brilliance.
Now, if what Ymir said is true, the origin of everything did come from one big explosion by the hand of the greater will, then before the explosion happened, everything was indeed one great, just as Hyeta, or the Three Fingers, explained.
I have touched them. The words of the Three Fingers. As your maiden, allow me to divine them. All that there is came from the one great. Then came fractures, and births, and souls. But the greater will made a mistake. Torment, despair, affliction, every sin, every curse, every one born of the mistake. And so, what was borrowed must be returned, melted all away with the yellow chaos flame, until all is one again.
Now, I'm not trying to push some frenzy flame propaganda here. It's just that the origin of life told by Three Fingers is also surprisingly confirmed by Ymir in the DLC. And if this is true, all these words that describe the Golden Order, such as regression, causality, chain of relation, and all things yearn to eternally converge is saying is that the Golden Order is fundamentally, get it, a return to the one great, a regression to the state before the rupture, the very first cause for all existence before the universe and life and souls are created. And if this is true, of course the Erdtree's Age of Plenty would end, when it was redefined again by the new Elden Ring, because the law that allows for eternal life has been replaced by the law of regression under the new Elden Ring.
So about that, I feel like it does overlook Destined Death's involvement in the creation of the Golden Order, and I am really curious how he's going to reconcile that with this kind of second Elden Ring, because if he's saying that the second Elden Ring represents the time of Golden Order fundamentalism, then it would mean it would have had to have landed with Destined Death still within it, which kind of seems a little bit antithetical to what he's building up towards right here. So, Methoda asks, are we ever given a reason why the Greater Will / Elden Beast need envoys? Why can't they or the Two Fingers rule directly? We are not given a direct reason, and they might not actually truly need envoys at all, and these kind of titles as envoys could just be self-proclaimed, essentially, because we don't really understand the Two Fingers' claims to authority other than that they can allegedly commune with the Greater Will, which is always a little bit suspect to me, that their position of authority runs on circular logic, they are correct essentially because they say so. Now, it doesn't help that by the time we meet the Two Fingers, we can't actually commune with them directly. And I mean, let's be real, it's a FromSoft game, so even if we could commune with the Two Fingers, we probably wouldn't ask it anything important anyway, much less get an answer. So, backing that up a bit, if the Two Fingers in their heyday before they were bent and broken were able to commune with the greater will, that's all well and good. It does raise the question of where did Meta fit in that relationship when she already abandoned and then the greater will, did he like skip a generation? So he like cast out the mother, accepted her children, and then after Marika shattered the ring, she like, or the greater will cast them all out as well. We are told that the greater will abandoned the realm, I think by Enia, but not exactly completely, because it still accepts the tarnished, which also raises a lot of questions. But of course, all of that information is secondhand from the Two Fingers themselves. So it could all just be an elaborate lie for the Two Fingers to kind of instantiate a world that they want through duping characters like Marika. And I do really find it frustrating that we get no indication between Marika and her involvement with the Fingers to get a better picture of what's going on, especially because there's a lot of leftover questions with the Finger Slayer blade and the high treason of the Nox, and especially Marika's alleged connections to the Nox as well, which kind of get even further removed with the DLC in the Shaman Village. Yeah, you said it seems like everyone's going through layers and layers of representatives. There's no way to run a universe. It's a perfect bureaucracy. Operator said, you guess if your old gods are parading around on Earth directly influencing things, they become too scrutable and less awe-inspiring, but that isn't an in-universe reason, of course. That kind of reminds me of a quote from like Discworld where there aren't very many atheists in Discworld because the gods are liable to like jump down and knock your house around if they find out you're an atheist. Something along those lines, which is just kind of really funny because the gods in Discworld are kind of more like Greco-Roman inspired, where they're kind of like personifications of concepts for the most part and kind of interact with the world a bit more directly in that way and are flawed creatures themselves. And then Galaxy says, in Bloodborne, the moon presence needed us to kill Emergo, a running theme. Perhaps higher dimensional beings cannot exist on lower planes directly. And that's another good point as well, and that could also tie into why the Elden Beast needs a vessel in the form of Marika / Radagon, and maybe that might also explain like why Marika thinks Radagon is the leal hound of the Golden Order. And so a big part of me would like to believe that the Elden Beast infected Marika as a kind of parasite and was Radagon, but if that's the case, it certainly doesn't help that Marika does refer to him as her other self. Now, of course, that could just be one way for Marika to other that other being within her, and it might not literally mean her other self, if that makes any sense, but I just don't think it really works with some of the other info that we've gotten in the game. And then Korn says, it is strange, though, that they don't want to rule by that. They just want to pick rulers. Yeah, I kind of get the feeling that the greater will might not actually care too much, and I view Elden Ring's universe kind of in a more deistic sense. And then, hey, Heat, welcome on back into the stream. You just want to eat oats? Okay. That's Torrent. No, I guess Torrent eats raisins, which are eyes.
However, this would also become a problem for the Golden Order, or perhaps an oversight of the design of the new Elden Ring. Why, you ask? Because the gods of the Golden Order, including the demigods, need to be eternal and immortal to maintain their reign and sovereignty. But now we have learned that the new laws of the new Elden Ring doesn't allow for eternal life. So, how should the Golden Order compensate? Well, simple. The removal of destined death.
Okay, so he does think that the new Golden Order Elden Ring initially had the Rune of Death in it. Okay, so that answers that question.
You seek the power of the Rune of Death too? The Rune of Death goes by two names. The other is Destined Death.
Although, let me listen to his argument again, because do they need that? Like, I feel like he's coming to a conclusion that they could have only come to after the fact of Destined Death's removal, and he's using that as a justification for their actions. So let me just listen to that part again.
This would also become a problem for the Golden Order, or perhaps an oversight of the design of the new Elden Ring. Why, you ask? Because the gods of the Golden Order, including the demigods, need to be eternal and immortal to maintain their reign and sovereignty. But now,
So right, in the first age of the Crucible and whatnot, he says that they are eternal because it's all dragon time, but then he does mention the Age of Abundance, which is fleeting, and I would have assumed that's because Destined Death was a thing, but he doesn't explain why it was fleeting then. Or maybe he's saying the reason it's fleeting is because of the arrival of the second Elden Ring. I think that's kind of what he's saying, yeah.
now we have learned that the new laws of the new Elden Ring doesn't allow for eternal life. So how should the Golden Order compensate? Well, simple. The removal of Destined Death.
You seek the power of the Rune of Death too? The Rune of Death goes by two names. The other is Destined Death. The forbidden shadow plucked from the Golden Order upon its creation.
Indeed, it was said that Destined Death was plucked from the Golden Order upon its creation, and it was plucked exactly to fix this problem, to make Marika, her demigod, and the Erdtree immortal under the new law of the new Elden Ring, so that the Golden Order can maintain its perpetual sovereignty. But that's also why the Erdtree became an object of faith instead. While it was again eternal with the removal of Destined Death, it was no longer life because of that. No more saps, no more tears. Under the last Elden Ring, eternal life did not have to be constant and immutable. But the eternal under the new ring, which was achieved through the removal of Destined Death, is different. As the incantation Immutable Shield would relate to the law of regression, it is the regression to become immutable, an eternal object of constant and unchange. So what caused the change in the two Elden Ring? Now, while both Elden Rings no doubt belongs to the Greater Will, what has made him change his mind from allowing eternal life to the law of regression? Well, maybe it's because the last Elden Ring was flawed? The fact that the god of Placidusax was able to flee as a vessel of the rain may exemplify just that. Or maybe it's as the Three Fingers said, the Greater Will did make a mistake by creating life and souls, and now he has realized it? What we can be sure, however, is that the last Elden Ring cycle is likely a failed one, due to the fleeing and absence of its god. It might have been abandoned together with the Fingers by the Greater Will. Indeed, considering it is said that Matter had received sign from the Greater Will before, and is also said to be the first shooting stars landed in the Lands Between, maybe Matter bore the last Elden Ring and started the last cycle, but was abandoned together with the cycle as it was a failure. The broken and unhinged nature of the Fingers could also be another contributor. So maybe that was why it was the Elden Beast that was accompanying the new Elden Ring, a living incarnation of the concept of order, a supervisor, so to speak, to rein in Marika. But spoiler alert, that didn't stop her from shattering the Elden Ring. Indeed, I believe that Marika was...
So he still hasn't reconciled to me when the second Elden Ring landed and why that kind of supersedes the previous ring. Like, how did Marika get in possession of that second alleged ring, and what happened to the first, if it, other than like being used to create the Erdtree? Or maybe, wait, wasn't his position that she used the last of that Elden Ring's powers to create the Erdtree and Shadow Tree? This is kind of weird.
Set in a rather passive position once she was truly legitimized with the arrival of the new Elden Ring and the Elden Beast. It was also at that moment that she realized herself she has become a puppet for perpetuation. And that is why it was also at that moment of realization that she started planning for her own liberation. The stilling of destined death, the shattering of the Elden Ring, and the future return of the god-slaying Tarnished, who did kill the Elden Beast and finally liberated her as we know it. But that would be a topic for another day. But now we have mentioned the Tarnished, it's time to reveal another secret that will complete the picture. As the incantation protection of the Erdtree would describe, in the beginning everything was in opposition to the Erdtree, but through countless victories in war it became the embodiment of order. And it would be Godfrey, the first Elden Lord chosen by Marika in the beginning of the Erdtree, together with his warriors that fought through countless battles for Marika. But just as the Erdtree was no longer eternal when the new Elden Ring was here, Godfrey, the Lord of the Erdtree, and his warriors were instead stripped of the grace of gold and banished from the lands between to become tarnished. And why, you ask? Because all the wars they fought were during the Age of Plenty, where the Erdtree flourished with abundance for two purposes: attracting followers to Marika's banner and sustaining them till victory is achieved. Yet their grace, the Erdtree saps, ambers, and blessing, everything Godfrey and his warriors had received to sustain them through Marika's war, were all belonged to the Erdtree that was defined by the last Elden Ring. Indeed, the end of the Age of Plenty, as well as the birth of the Tarnished, were all because of the one same reason. They all had the gold of the last cycle. They were the remnant of the once eternal Erdtree, of the last Elden Ring. And just like the eternal Erdtree, they too had to make way for the new laws, for the new Golden Order. So now we have the big picture with plenty of turning points of the Erdtree history revealed. What does it all imply?
So about that, if he's saying the Age of Abundance Erdtree was eternal, and then Marika removed the Rune of Death from the new Elden Ring to make death go away, at one point was the Erdtree no longer perfect and eternal? It sounds like even during the Golden Order it should have been eternal, and then that would contradict a lot of the ideas for the existence of the Erdtree seeds, although there's like the Erdtree seed description is or is the Golden Seed? The Golden Seed description says it's kind of like just a belief of people and isn't necessarily representative of fact regardless, but you know, just keeping that in mind, then when would the Erdtree seeds have sprouted? Does he think that it was like a post-shattering event? And then, yeah, I'm still, like, I get that Godfrey and the Age of Abundance was under an older version of the Elden Ring, but that's still, well, actually, this doesn't really work, does it? Because Godfrey's depiction of the Elden Ring is more in line with the so-called newer depiction of the Elden Ring, and doesn't really resemble the depiction of the Elden Ring in Placidus Axe's area, or Malekith's arena, whatever you want to call it. And then Korn says, if that were true, wouldn't Metter have turned into the first Elden Ring like the Elden Beast eventually became? Let me think about that. I don't think so, unless, so if Metter is to Marika, then the Elden Beast is to like the Elden Ring, and so I don't necessarily think the Metter or Marika become the Elden Beast, although I guess there is that little bit more ambiguity with how like Radagon kind of becomes the Elden Beast, I guess, but it's a good question. I don't know, I guess is the long and short answer of it. And then Queen Matica Lover, welcome back in. You were asking if D has one body and two souls. What about Miquella? Is he one soul or two souls and one body? We don't really know, and that's kind of one of the weirder things to ascertain about like the Empyreans, because Miyazaki in an interview said that there is a kind of like multiplicity to them. I don't remember exactly what he said, and that could imply maybe multiple souls. But if Miquella and Melania do kind of represent aspects of the Golden Order, I would be more inclined to say that they have one soul. But maybe that's why St. Trina's sleeping, because Miquella is the one up and about. So if Miquella dies, well, Trina doesn't exactly walk around after that either. I don't know. It's weird. Maybe they have 0 souls because they're cursed.
From the perspective of the DLC, which is about Marika's backstory, it certainly makes you wonder if Marika had other agenda than just taking vengeance on the Hornsent. It becomes apparent after the DLC that Marika and her people, the shamans, were under brutal oppression by the Hornsent, and she was basically signing the devil's contract with the Two Fingers for vengeance, a seduction of gold. But what was the betrayal mentioned? And also, what was the cadaver or the object from which Marika retrieved the golden thread? Could that be related to the betrayal? While it is understandable that Marika would take away the crucible from the Hornsent as revenge, why did she have to establish a faith of her own and to start a war against all faction in the lands between? Was complete domination necessary for her vengeance? Or did she have other agendas similar to Miquella's, fighting for a better world, one that she had hoped she was born into? Well, I'm afraid it simply is part of the deal for Marika in exchange for vengeance against the Hornsent, to establish sovereignty of the greater will for the Two Fingers in the lands between. Yes, that's why Marika started a war for the Two Fingers in exchange for vengeance. From the perspective of the overarching narrative, it also becomes apparent that while Marika succeeded in her revenge, the price she paid was very costly, a perpetual puppet of the greater will and the Golden Order. But it also further established her motives and shed further light into the chain of events that she set in motion for her own liberation. Under this theory, the banishment of the Tarnished was not the will of Marika, but instead the greater will. But it's also apparent that Marika did make plan for their return, and this would also be a focus of my future videos as well.
So, at least he said he's going to make future videos about that, because I would have liked more to support those kind of claims, because I feel like a lot of this stuff is pretty high conjecture. And then Operator says, maybe Empyreans need to be multi-potentialite in some sense, with dual identities being one way to satisfy that. Ranni's able to assume an alter ego of Rena, even if she doesn't seem to have a true second self. Well, as far as Ranni's second self, I mean, she does kind of cast away at least one body, like her original body. So there could have been more to her story that we just didn't learn of, to be fair. And then you were saying, random speculation, Empyreans are the only beings the Two Fingers can actually make shadows for, because in some sense these individuals support alter egos? Maybe. So, that's a good question. And it really sucks that all of the Two Fingers are dead by the time we see them, because if the Two Fingers had the power to lift Marika up enough to kind of upend a previous age, it certainly would have been nice to see more of that interaction with the Tarnished or Melina or something like that, other than just the kind of a nondescript revival by grace, which seems more tied to the Erdtree than the Two Fingers themselves.
Also, I mentioned that the last Elden Ring cycle was most likely a failed one. But was the civilization of the Hornsent part of the cycle? Or was this something that developed on its own entirely after the cycle? And how about Mesmer? Where does his crusade ordered by Marika fit into all these? If you enjoyed this video, as well as my attempt at a detective-like presentation style, where I try to include reasoning process and relate everything to reveal a bigger picture, then please like and subscribe and click the bell button for more. Do let me know your thoughts, questions, and different opinions about the theories and revelations of the video in the comments below. Welcome to Orcham's Onion, and thank you for watching. Stay tuned, and I'll see you soon.
Alright, yeah, so despite my kind of disagreements, I actually think this was a really great video, and definitely made me reconsider some things from a new lens, which I definitely enjoy. So I've gone ahead and shared Occam's Onion with you guys in the chat. I'm curious what all else they have, if they have anything else. So is this literally it? All right, well, I'm just going to sub just to be, notified if we get some more info about that stuff. Oh, so there's... Despite the Erdtree being once perfectly eternal. Alright, so that doesn't really give me more info about that. This has gotten more attention than I could have imagined. After going through your comments, I've come to realize there are some premises and conclusions of this theory that should have been elaborated and explained a bit more in the video. So I'm putting the elaborations here, hoping to make things clearer. I should probably make this a little bit bigger for you guys. Alright. So, 1. The 2 Elden Ring premise. The description of the incantation Elden Stars describes the arrival of the Elden Ring / Beast and is an Erdtree incantation. This seems to imply that the Elden Ring was sent during and is linked to the era of the Erdtree. On the other hand, the Ancient Dragons era is a prehistoric era before the Erdtree, yet they also seem to have an Elden Ring of their own, and a different looking one at that. Meanwhile, Meta is said to be the first shooting star to fall upon the lands between, in a similar fashion as the Elden Star which bore the Elden Ring. So from here, the simplest solution would be the conclusion of 2 rings, first one born by Metter in the prehistoric time of the Ancient Dragons, and the second one born by an Elden Star in the age of the Erdtree of Marika. So... yeah, I can't really say too much about this right now, so let's continue on. Point number 2. Elden Stars is also a great counter-evidence to the theory. Elden Stars is also said to be the most ancient of incantations derived from the Erdtree. Since this incantation is the most ancient one, also known as the first one derived from the Erdtree, and mentions the arrival of the Elden Ring, it can also imply that the Elden Ring beast was sent during the earliest days of the Erdtree, if not before its existence, and is linked to its creation. Therefore, the Elden Ring / Beast seems unlikely to have arrived near the end of the Age of Plenty, as the video suggests. True story. And then he says, this is indeed a hard one for that part of the theory, but the theory overall can still stand as long as the ring was sent on the earliest days of the Erdtree and not before its creation. I mean, we're struggling with this. Marika instead waited the war to end where the Erdtree finally became the embodiment of order before she made all the changes, which is a strategically sensible thing to do. Yeah, I disagree with that. Yeah, this is just kind of weird. I just don't think that works. So anyway, point 2, number 2. Ymir and the Three Fingers are unreliable narrators. I agree we cannot treat their words as facts. It's obvious they have their own agenda and are most likely insane. But what Ymir said about the fingers being broken was also mentioned by Gideon in the description of the Lord's divine fortification incantation. On the other hand, the origin story told by the Three Fingers in the base game is reinforced by Ymir's version in the DLC. Given the context that there is limited amount of lore and revelations FromSoft can put into the DLC, and they had to be efficient on what's best to include to tie in the story as best they can, I think it makes more sense that FromSoft is confirming the origin story to us through Ymir, rather than simply repeating an unreliable narrator theme of the Three Fingers with such length. And then... and considering Ymir's goal is to become a mother of fingers, it seems more likely that he would be besmirching the mother of the fingers instead, about it being unhinged and broken. However, the fingers being broken was once again confirmed by other sources as well, so maybe he's not as much of an unreliable narrator upon closer inspection as he seemed. So, because Ymir seeks to become a mother of fingers himself, it's because he seems unsatisfied with the current version of the Mother of Fingers, and his dialogue could be clouded with certain emotions like jealousy, regret, etc. And because he doesn't truly reveal his motivations to us, it seems as though he's hiding things, and he is using us as a means to fit an end, and that makes him suspect. And even if he does tell us the truth to an extent, there do seem to be some lies by omission, which kind of makes it hard to truly trust the other things which he says. So anyway, let me think about that. So, about Ymir being broken when she gave birth to the two fingers, which would go on to like influence Marika. Part of the reason some people are more reticent to accept that coming from Ymir is that if there ever has been any semblance of true authority given to the two fingers on behalf of the greater will, then that would kind of contradict the idea of them being born broken by matter, and you would really need to help explain how they're broken and all that and whatnot. But that's just kind of a recurring issue looking into this aspect of the lore. 3. The greater will is too involved in this theory. The presentation of this theory does somehow seem to suggest so I should have elaborated more on this. I think the changes and events mentioned in this video happened not because of the greater will was actively interfering and making them happen, but because of the new laws and order ordained by the Elden Ring and the beast that is described as the living incarnation of the concept of order. Well, wait, that doesn't make sense. So he's saying that the greater will was not actively interfering, but then it's sending the Elden Ring should be seen as an act of active interference, I would say. So he's like retroactively applying the actions of the Elden Beast as being a reaction to something of the greater will, or maybe not reaction, but like yeah. So the Elden Beast is causing the greater will to react, but the greater will was proactive when it sent the Elden Ring and Beast. Or maybe he means the first Elden Ring. Yeah, that's kind of hard to remember. Well, no, he says the Beast. Anyway. Again, the Elden Ring is a concept that defines the world, and changes happen simply because the new ring defined the world differently and ordained a new order. Well, this is putting the cart before the horse, because the new ring should come from the greater will according to his cosmology here. Is the greater will completely passive and indifferent? We know the Nox invoked the ire of the greater will, and Estelle was sent to banish them underground. Well, that's arguable. Unless this too is an unreliable narrator, it would be safe to conclude the greater will did make his will known and interfered at times and is not totally passive. So I do kind of, well, for the most part, I can kind of agree with this, but I'll just leave that be for now. Finally, there are a lot of nuances or events this video hasn't really touched on or fit in. That's also why this will not be the last video or theory of this channel. Thank you, fellow Tarnished, for showing so much love on my first video. Okay, cool. So he also replied further on. So I'm going to see what this says before I comment. So it's ungrateful. Okay. Elden Scars. I don't care about thee or an or new. Matter does not have any golden attacks, but she was not an Elden Lord like Placidus Axe, and was instead a shooting star, just like the Elden Star. Her lack of gold does not necessarily imply her inability to carry the Elden Ring, considering she is the daughter of the Greater Will who sent the ring. Anyway. Hey MK, nice to see you again. Alright, so that seems that for that. Thinks the Elden Ring in Fair Missoula could be different in an earlier ring which arrived through different means, and we just so happen to have Metter, who is said to be the very first shooting star. Alright, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to leave a comment on the video. If I can find it. Oh yeah, let's do this. I enjoyed the video and thinking about the lore in a new light. However, I do have some issues with the way some information should fit together. For instance, what was I gonna say? He personally believes there's a second lands between on the opposite side of the sun. Is that like the dark side of the sun, or like in the great beyond with the greater will and whatnot? Let me hydrate real quick. If you say Godfrey's Age of Abundance based Elden Ring was the Elden Ring from Placidusac's reign, shouldn't all his Elden Ring iconography match that which we find in Farum Azula? If so, then why is his Elden Ring so visually distinct and more similar to that of the Golden Order fundamentalists? Beyond that, I think you've established a timeline where there would have been no period in which the Age of Abundance would come to an end. Godfrey's Elden Ring is eternal, based off the dragon's gold, but when the Golden Order ring arrives, destined death is removed. I'm gonna put immediately in underscores to give some emphasis to that. Destined death is removed immediately, and the Erdtree should also be considered eternal here. So then, wouldn't the Erdtree always be considered perfect and eternal? At least up until the shattering? Because we're told the Geo started with the removal of the rod, I don't think it's fair to connect any alleged second Elden Rings to the Golden Order, even though I agree with you in that Marika's ascension to godhood seemed unordered, for lack of a better term. P.S. I live streamed my reaction to this video on my channel. If you want to see that, you can find it on the live section of my channel if you're interested. Okay, that's good enough for me right there. Alrighty, so with that said and done, let's go ahead and move on into Sinclair Lore's video about Miquella and cult psychology with a troubled maker. Oh damn, it's so much louder.
Alright, hello, Troubled Maker.
I was actually thinking that my name kind of sounds like a rap name, kind of. Like if somebody just calls me Trouble. Because I don't want to be one of the ones that's like Lil Trouble that have the tattoos that look like somebody drew on their face when they were drunk. And so yeah, here I am.
All right, everybody, what's your rap name based off of your username? I think for me, I would have to be like Lil Tag, because Protagonist can get shortened down to Tag, and that could also kind of be seen as like tagging graffiti style. I don't know. So Valkyrie420, welcome into the stream.
Like, when did that become a look?
So, you know a lot about cults.
Yep.
And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today, but this is your first appearance.
So speaking about cults, I kind of had a friend in college whose family belonged to a cult. I'm pretty confident, because that stuff was not like a mainstream religious belief. I don't know enough about it, but they had some unhinged theories about things like floating islands, literal mole men under the ground, and how the government stole all of this technology from this religion's preacher and whatnot. And it was a little bit tragic trying to interact with my friend about that kind of stuff, just because he would take his dad's word at face value for everything. So he told me one day that there were trillions of dollars worth of gold that was buried underneath the World Trade Center, and then the mafia stole it all after 9/11. And I was like, trillions? You're full of it. Like, there's no way the government would let trillions of dollars of gold just be stolen and do nothing about it. So Valkyrie's a mole person. That doesn't match the username, but anyway. What part of any of that is false? The fact that none of it has been falsified. And then, hey Dylan, you'd be DJ McG. DJM are your initials. McG, the first letters of your last name. I like it. DJ McG. All right.
On this show.
Mm-hmm.
So would you just like to introduce yourself and talk to us a little bit about how you ended up playing Elden Ring?
Well, I was stuck in bed and couldn't do much else. And then I was also thinking, I was like, I don't want to be in bed. What can I get good at? Oh, 3,000 hours later. Not because I'm all just playing it, because I also intentionally broke the game and put it back together to make it look prettier.
Yeah, so you actually have a channel of your own that you have all of your like free cam mod footage on, if anyone sort of is curious about that.
Yeah, maybe that might exist. Yeah. Oh, there's stuff I kind of noticed, and I was like, oh, that's that's a lamprey. That's kind of what I find to be the because there's been like a smattering of other people that I think have gotten into this that wouldn't otherwise for whatever reason, and they have different backgrounds that would have insight into things, or they're from a different part of the world, and so they would see something and notice something that maybe others wouldn't. So you are actually really into lore stuff, I heard.
Apparently, yeah.
Yeah, apparently.
I'm trying to get away from it.
Yeah, you probably should keep doing it. At least until we're done.
That's funny. Keep doing it even though you don't want to. So yeah, for anybody who might not be too familiar with the Snack Covenants, Sophie has done a lot of lore work over the years, ever since like the early days of Dark Souls, maybe Demon Souls. I mean, I'm sure over the course of the channel and whatnot, they've covered Demon Souls. I just don't remember how active she was back in the beginning, because I kind of joined the lore community late, relatively speaking, where it was like 5 years after the release of Bloodborne is kind of when I first started making videos, even though I'd been like looking at community stuff for like maybe a year or so before that. before I kind of got fed up and was like, okay, I guess if I'm not satisfied with other people's stuff, I just need to like make my own to get my own thoughts out there, which is kind of, you know, obviously what led to this point in the channel. So, the fact that Sophie wants to go a different direction is not very surprising, considering how long they've been active in the lore community. So, best of luck.
So, as you mentioned, everyone sort of brings their own interests and their own experiences to their engagement, and something that you know a lot about, because it's a subject of interest to you, and you've done a lot of research and reading on it, is how cults work. We got to talking about that, and that led us to discuss, you know, how that sort of dovetails into the DLC with Miquella having these really devoted followers, and how kind of the cult of Miquella is in its own way different from, say, like the worship of Marika, or what someone like Moog is doing. Like there's something specific kind of about what's going on with Miquella.
Yeah. Because a religion is different than a cult.
Kind of my jumping off point was that, like, I don't know as much about this as you do. My very limited understanding of the situation is basically that, like, the key difference between what makes something a religion and what makes something a cult is that a religion is venerating, like, some sort of deity that is not of this earth. They are following, like, a specific code or something like that. Whereas
the way that I've kind of always viewed it is that the difference between a religion and a cult is whether or not you can interact with its leader. By what I mean by that, it's like, sure, you can interact with the Pope of the Catholic Church, but like you can't interact with the leader of the Catholic Church in that, like, being Jesus Christ himself, or, you know, the God and the Holy Spirit above him or along him, whatever you want to call it. And whereas like many cults are just kind of formed by one individual or a very, very small group of people, and most tend to be a cult of personality where people get undertaken by the charm of a charismatic leader, which will definitely dovetail nicely into the talks of Miquella and even potentially Marika and Radagon to some degree.
A cult is about the will of, like, a single person, a single individual that is being venerated.
Not necessarily.
Right.
When certain religions kind of become culty, I guess you could say, the term for that is usually high demand group. Very like strict forms of Christianity, like really, really, but it ends up being like very small. Like it's not something that's particularly common, and that's so that can occur. And I typically usually would just by default refer to them as high demand groups because you don't want to get in the habit of calling things cults or even culty because of that being kind of a loaded word. Also, at the same time, losing its meaning entirely. But the core part of it is that your environment's controlled and you don't have a sense of agency. There's more to it than that, of course, but there's it's a massive element of control.
Right, yeah. So I do like this distinction that a troubled maker is making here. So I'm just gonna read some things on the infographic that I have up because it sounds very interesting. So this is the Byte model by Dr. Stephen Hassan, apparently, and it talks about methods used to control people by undue influence. And there's like 4 big categories: behavior, information, thought, and emotional. And underneath behavior, we have controls of physical environment, rigid rules, rewards and punishments, dependence and obedience. And then information, we have deception, propaganda, discourages access to outside sources of information, and the insider/outsider doctrine, understandable. Thought is another category and has all or nothing, good versus evil, us versus them, dogma. Then encourages only good and proper thoughts and has thought stopping techniques. Interesting. Then emotional control would be feeling chosen or feeling special, guilt manipulation, emotion blocking techniques, and phobia indoctrination. So definitely paints a pretty good picture of a lot of that stuff. So what are they called? High demand groups? That's going to be interesting. Because, yeah, I can definitely see why stepping away from using the term cult would be a good move to make if you actually want to discuss things and not have people get hung up by, what's the word? Pre-existing connotations? But there's like another word for it. Preconceived notions. Okay. You wonder what does not contain any of these things? Well, I mean, there's probably going to be levels to each of these for like any kind of organization, depending on what you want to talk about. But I mean, let's think about this. So, I mean, I was going to talk about school for a second, whereas, like, obviously all of the behavior stuff is kind of in line with, like, public schools and whatnot, and I don't want to get into the whole garbage arguments of, like, oh, well, the schools deceive you, they kind of propagandize students into believing certain things. Sure, that stuff's arguable, but, I mean, I feel like a lot of people who would make those points aren't really doing it in good faith to begin with. And then, as far as the thought stuff goes, I do think that's kind of a big difference for like, public schools and like cults if you want to go into like what doesn't fit into that. Whereas even though like you might have like school teams for sports and whatnot, there really isn't much of a pressure of all and nothing trains of thought or good versus evil and us versus them dogma in like a public school. But maybe that is also a bit more dependent on region and individual schools. And then for a lot of people, school doesn't necessarily make them feel chosen or special, even if they may be forced to feel or manipulated to feel guilty at times, or have had certain techniques used to control their emotions and lock them down. I feel like that's not supposed to be the norm, and when such techniques are employed, it's due to like toxic administration. Dylan likes that too. It feels impossible to meaningfully deploy cult at times. It's one of those very fuzzy words. Exactly.
And often there's the use of coercion, whether it be coercive control or coercive persuasion. The thing with whenever you look into or whenever you're aware of that sort of practice and manipulation, the thing is that what's more common than that is the elements behind it that often facilitate and help like run a cult. So things like propaganda, trying to intentionally deceive, indoctrination, like those particular core elements typically will show up and are able to be identified a lot easier, especially in places in media and especially online.
So within Elden Ring, what would you say is like the unique property of the Miquella followers that is kind of making that more cultish than, say, like the people who worship Marika?
We could start with the bewitching branch. That immediate, basically, whenever I saw that, I'm just kind of like, oh, okay, that's essentially set up like either thought reform or like completely indoctrinating somebody because
Right.
you've essentially taken away their agency and their free will.
Right.
And then there are things that were said as the for the trailers and the DLC. Remind me of kind of how Miquella is introduced like initially in the game, because it's been a while since I very first played it and was introduced to everything. It was probably 2.5 years ago. So
So Miquella's technically introduced like in the intro.
You're right.
To the game, but it's just like a static picture of him being kidnapped by Mog.
Mm-hmm.
So throughout the game, Miquella is a character that like you keep hearing about, and he is described in these like incredibly sort of potent terms. Like he is like the most fearsome of the Empyreans.
Right.
The way he is presented is he's the twin of Melania. When they are born, there is a curse that is placed upon them. So Melania is afflicted by the rot, and Miquella's afflicted by being essentially a child for eternity. You never actually get a really good look at him. You see depictions of him, and you see his hand, and you see like sort of like ghostly visions of him, but he looks like he's about 8 or 9 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So even though Miquella is sort of forever a child, he is also depicted as incredibly intelligent and possessing this incredible degree of just like raw power. He uses that to try and cure Melania of the Scarlet Rot.
Mm-hmm.
And in the process of doing that, he realizes that Marika's Golden Order, Marika's entire religion, is insufficient. It's not up to...
So now that I think about it, perhaps Miquella creating like the Rings of Light incantation could show a fascination with rings or Elden Rings or something like that, and might tie into the propensity for him to try and become a god. So that's kind of an interesting thought right there. And then Global Sequence is saying that the chosen aspect of being tied to a high demand group, I'll try to keep that terminology here, is also very often tied to the idea of a doomsday. Like, you're safe as long as you're in the high demand group. Exactly. Dylan likes the shot of Gold Mask compositionally. Yeah, there are some really pretty vantages in the game. So even though I don't think like it's the most graphically demanding thing ever, or like maybe the most impressive visually, I will say that its art design is pretty strong, all things considered. Which I'm still a little bit surprised that they won that award that they did, but, you know, more power to them.
To the task of what Miquella wants to do. So Miquella leaves, and he essentially starts his own, we're going to say religion for now, but we're going to call it a cult later on.
Okay.
Much like Marika, he ends up sealing himself inside of a gigantic holy tree.
Mm-hmm.
Which becomes this beacon, and it specifically becomes a beacon for the people that Marika has kicked out. The people that Marika has sort of made other.
Mm-hmm.
As you travel to Miquella's holy tree, you find out that, like, you know, the other people who are treading the same path as you are, like, the Albinorics.
Both versions.
The misbegotten, people who've got the Scarlet Rot. It's this hodgepodge.
Which, now that I think about it, is a little bit tragic that we don't get an Albinoric to join us on our journey into the realm of shadow. Maybe it just wasn't wheelchair accessible. I don't know.
Of people who are not blessed by the Erdtree. Essentially, they're all on this big pilgrimage to Miquella because they view Miquella as this savior.
Mm-hmm.
Along with that, Miquella also has this alternate self called Saint Trina.
Yeah.
Saint Trina is, in a lot of ways, like, the opposite of Miquella.
You really think of them as opposites? Like, completely?
Well, I think of them as, like, not so much complete opposites, but as, like, things that are in tension with each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He's simultaneously, like, he's a boy and he's a girl. He's a child and he's an adult. He's awake and he's asleep.
Yeah, because there's kind of the drawing the parallel between, you know, Radagon, Marika. How are they one? How does that work? When did they split off? How do they do that?
I always found that interesting because, like, the way that the Marika-Radagon thing is kind of described to you, it's like Radagon and Marika are two distinct things, and Marika kind of invites Radagon to become one with her.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Miquella and Saint Trina, they were always in that contradiction.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Marika kind of invites it into herself. And, like, the other thing that I always found really interesting about the Miquella Saint Trina thing is that, like, Miquella's curse is to be forever a child. But Saint Trina's not a child.
Right.
So it's always also seemed to me like, oh, Saint Trina is sort of like when Miquella grows out somehow of being a child, they will become something like Saint Trina.
Does it say at some point, like, refer to Saint Trina in some way as Miquella's fate?
What happens is in the trailer that you hear later narrate and say, like,
even his fate,
and it shows Saint Trina going down the fissure.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, even before that, like, I always, like, kind of saw her that way. Then the DLC happened.
Mm-hmm.
And that didn't happen.
Right.
Right. Something that we talked about just then was, like, Marika has created a world where there are a lot of people who are dispossessed. who do not have places to go, who are cast out of society, who, like, feel like there is no hope, but then they see Miquella. And Miquella represents, like, somewhere that they can go. So, do you want to talk about how that, like, kind of plays into this very cultish idea with Miquella?
Whenever a person is in a situation or in a predicament where they are incredibly vulnerable and they are looking for something and they're desperate, not that Miquella particularly does this bit, but usually if there is kind of like a cult leader, essentially they promise them that thing and that they are the only ones that can provide it and that they have the answer and that they're right. There's a term called the sacred science, and it's that they know how to figure out everything and they know how to put it together, and that's actually kind of a part of kind of a criteria that we can go over later. But that's what makes it really appealing, because then you've got someone that is willing to completely give more to you than would otherwise be rational or logical. That's like a mandatory element.
And so tragically for Miquella's followers, they didn't catch on to the fact that he had ADHD and would never follow through with any of his plans to completion. Anyway, Paisan, nice to see you again. Miquella does make some big promises when you fight him. Yeah. Like I was saying the other day on stream, and I kind of feel like I need to make a video for this, and I just need to, like, stop adding video ideas to the pile and just start executing on them. Speaking of, ADHD and executive dysfunction, that when Miquella tells us to stand aside so that way he could embrace all that there is and whatnot, I do think there is a bit of a double meaning to that, in that when Miquella embraces something, he doesn't actually accept it for what it is. It could just be a coded way of saying, let me embrace it, I will fix it, I will put it to order, like, manually, with the kind of charming binding vow that he places on to people, which at first I thought was just kind of like a Miquellan thing to do, but when you think about it, it really isn't that different from the types of curses or vows that Marika or even Radagon can place upon others with the sword and scar seals. You thought that old lady was a Astarion? Oh my god. So, oh man, how does one try to explain the Golden Girls? I don't even think I could begin to explain the Golden Girls. So anyway, I will leave that alone. But I guess it truly has been an age where people don't recognize the Golden Girls anymore. And then Stella, nice to see you. You call it, under the right conditions, anyone can fall for anything. True. You can read Trina as his accepting side, you think? I don't know. Like, the fact that we do get that depiction of Saint Trina as an adult does leave me wondering if there's more to that Saint Trina story that we never really got, even though Trina seems to be accepting of Miquella as Miquella and doesn't want him to become a god. I wonder exactly why, and why she knows it's a prison, because I think Miquella would also know that, but chooses to go through with it anyway. I could also see it just being like the boy genius trope / archetype of, I'm a genius, I can fix it, just let me do it, even though it might be beyond his ability to fix because he's essentially a child and whatnot.
So one of the other things that's kind of relevant about the Miquella situation versus, say, Marika is that, like, Marika, even though she's no longer really a present force in the world, she's been sealed inside the Erdtree for $1,000 years now.
Mm-hmm.
There is, like, a political structure built up around her and, like, a military structure built up around her, and she's, like, her authority is sort of absolute. Like, she is the top of, like, a pyramid power structure. Miquella is also someone who's, like, not really present, but it's a lot looser. Like, people are just sort of coming toward Miquella from all over the place. And this ties into something you were talking about with regard to like how cults versus religions function, which is totalism versus authority.
The understanding of kind of cults as we know them currently really came about around in like the 40s and 50s. Here's what people saw.
And that's really surprising to me that it's kind of that late, but I guess not. Anyway, I've got some other thoughts that I want to share like later on in the stream if the thing comes back to me. Maybe I should make a note. Anyway.
That they were so like taken aback by, that was really kind of the like seeing somebody that was completely indoctrinated, was prisoners of war, and basically people who were kind of forced to confess and turn against their own country. Like that was really kind of the example that was presented, and they were trying to understand how did that happen.
Mhm.
You know, and it they noticed it wasn't done through physical torture. That really wasn't particularly effective. What they noticed was that it was very much a learned helplessness that was kind of created, and also messing with their environment. Whenever
Okay, so I see you guys getting a bit confused. So Corin's like, what? Cults have been around for thousands of years, quite famous cults? Then Global Sequence was saying, maybe they mean your modern conception of it. Cults have been around for thousands of years. So yeah, it's not so much that cults haven't been around for thousands of years, so much as it has been like the systematic study of the psychology, I think, of becoming indoctrinated into a cult is what they're trying to get at here. And ironically enough, the thing that I was like, maybe I'll get to later has to tie into like boot camp and joining the military and things like that. And I might get into some more things about that in a moment here.
you are able to affect someone's sleep, sense of time, that's when you really have them, when you're able to really make somebody malleable.
Right.
You want to isolate a person.
Hmm.
Like you want to keep them away from other people, because you don't want other people to be acting as an influence, because you only want to really kind of overwhelm them with just yours and have them be dependent on that.
Yeah. So we'll use this as like a jumping off point to kind of talk about like the various Miquella kind of cultist NPCs that you encounter in the DLC.
So yeah, about controlling time and people's sleep and whatnot, I do wonder if like that is part of the aspect of like boot camp and stuff like that, because I don't know, like one thing that has fascinated me is certain people's propensity to be so-called like brainwashed, and that's something that I just don't quite understand. Maybe it's because I'm too individualistic, and I don't mean this in like, I'm like you can't brainwash me kind of way. I mean that because I went through boot camp. I was perfectly fine. It didn't really affect me as far as like the individual aspect of my character goes, which isn't to say that there weren't like transformations as a result of being put into an environment like that. However, from other people's stories with whom I've interacted in the military, there was one guy who told me, and the most ironic thing about this is he became a reservist, is that once he went through boot camp and was sent home for like the 10-day leave after you like finish boot camp and go on to your next like training station and whatnot, he said that he just kind of sat at home waiting to be told what to do. That just like kind of blew my mind. It's like, for real? I didn't really expect like people experienced stuff like that. So I really wonder why that experience had that kind of effect on him, and what about his character or biology or whatnot produced such results. Yes, I was in the military. And then Stella was saying, basically, Marika is the god emperor of mankind, still at the top, even though she can't do anything to give any kind of orders. And then cults as in high control groups here, yeah. Dylan says, object versus discursive object are different things, yet share one word, can get very confusing at times. True story. So yeah, I was trying to like look into this, not terribly recently, but just, over time. It's like, how does boot camp work on the individual psyche? Because some people do legitimately get broken down by it, but if you try to look it up, you're not really going to get too much. And I don't know if it's just because obviously militaries around the world wouldn't want such information out in the public hands for whatever reason, or even like out in their enemies' hands for whatever reason. It makes a lot of sense to keep that kind of stuff close to the chest. But I don't necessarily think that this is such a modern phenomenon. There have always been militaries since like kind of the dawn of civilization, with varying degrees of militarism and order that goes along with it. Because, like serfs weren't exactly soldiers. So maybe that's kind of the distinction I should make between like a military versus like having like professional soldiers and whatnot. But I digress. All right, let's go on.
Okay.
Because something that I found when I first played it, and I went through the Shadow Keep door and the Great Rune broke. And then Ansbach was like, oh, the spell's been lifted. I kind of initially thought of that as a bit of a cheat. Like, what they've done is they've gone, oh, Miquella's just mind-controlling people. So their motives didn't matter. Right. He was just mind-controlling them. What I now appreciate going back to it is that actually they all have, like, reasons to do what they do, and they all respond to the Miquella bewitching / unbewitching in different ways. So the one who's like straightforwardly like, oh shit, I was mind controlled, is Ansbach.
Right.
And Ansbach straight up says like, hey, actually I was fighting with Miquella, and Miquella did his like brainwashing move on me where he grabs you and hugs you. And interestingly, Ansbach blames himself for that. He says, like, I was weak. I couldn't stand up to it. I failed Moog. Right. Then you have, like, Freya. Freya is following Miquella because, specifically, there was a point in Freya's life where she was dying of Scarlet Rot. And Miquella appeared before her and healed her. And because of that, she continues to side with Miquella even when the bewitching is lifted. So it's almost like the bewitching was kind of a formality with her, like she was already ready to follow Miquella. Moore is just lost and wants friends. And when the bewitching is lifted, you can actually tell Moore what to do. Like, he doesn't seem to have, like, a great deal of...
he needs direction.
He needs direction. He's someone who comes across as, like, he attaches himself to, like, groups of people. And he's like, these people like me, I'll be their friend. So when you meet him in the game, he's like, he's friends with the other Miquella people. He's also friends with a bunch of Kindred of Rot. And it's like he doesn't really know how to think independently of, like, having a group around him.
Right.
So he's obviously, like, in a very, very malleable, vulnerable position to, like, Miquella showing up and saying, hey, follow me into the Land of Shadow. Dryleaf Dane is a bit odder because he barely has any dialogue and he's described as, like...
Now I'm thinking of Dryleaf Dane as an otter instead.
Like, a very, like, ascetic, wandering figure.
Yeah, he's already a monk, yeah.
Yeah, they specify that, like, he's apparently always wanted Miquella to rise as a god since beforehand. So this, again, seems to be independent of the bewitching. Like, he's just a Miquella follower.
Yeah, this would be somebody that is already kind of looking for that sort of devotion to something, that or a higher purpose of some sort.
So
yeah, and one of the things which surprised me about Miquella's followers was how many continue to follow him even after the disillusionment of their enchantment, essentially. And I think that does show a lot of insight as to, like, Miquella's characterization and his mostly unstated goals and how that affected the people that he interacted with. And for the most part, they would have continued to follow him despite that all. And yeah, I just wouldn't have expected that. And there's something that I wanted to build off of that. Right, so essentially his enchantment may have just enforced a non-aggression pact amongst his followers, more or less. And I do wonder how much of that was like him making them follow him more specifically versus just not kill each other so that way they could just serve him better, which to me would be a lot more interesting of a move on his part. Am I picking up anything here that isn't being said? Could you elaborate? You mean like as far as the voices are going on here or just in the chat itself? And then Dylan says, for some reason you want a Souls-like where all the characters are cute animals, yet everything happening is every bit as dark. Done well, you think it'd be a hit? So isn't that kind of like Crab Souls or something like that? Maybe it's not as dark, but I digress.
There's 3 more of them who I think are like, these are to me the 3 most interesting ones, right? So, Tolier. Tolier is interesting because, like, he doesn't actually care about Miquella, he cares about Saint Trina.
Yeah.
So his devotion to Miquella is actually the devotion to Saint Trina, and when he realizes that Miquella and Trina have separated, he just stays with Trina. And the way that he talks about Trina, it's kind of similar to the way that Freya talks about Miquella, where it's like he had this encounter with Saint Trina. It's like he has this ecstatic experience of the true, like, velvety sleep of Saint Trina, and he spends the rest of his life chasing it. So it's somewhere between, like, an ecstatic experience and, like, you know, chasing, like, a high that he sort of remembers having.
Talia reminds me kind of somebody that struggles with addiction.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, that's people that are seeking kind of, I mean, I don't want to sound cliche in this, but are seeking sort of an escape.
Yeah.
Or a disconnect of some sort. And I mean, the way that he talks about it, it just sounds very narcotic. Like,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I can't really think of it anyway.
I was watching some of the Robert J. Lifton stuff that you sent me, and one of the things that he talks about is like the way that cults would practice chanting and breathing in a way that specifically starved your brain of oxygen. It puts you in this like kind of half awake, half asleep state where you're very, very suggestible.
Yeah, it's hypoxia. I mean, you're not getting enough oxygen to the brain. It makes you lightheaded, and you actually, it impairs your cognitive functioning. So, I mean, you're not going to be able to think critically. You're like hardly at all. So that's very intentional.
So then we've got Hornsent. So even though Hornsent is bewitched, Hornsent has this almost like pragmatic view of Miquella, which is that Miquella is going to kind of depose the authority of the Erdtree. Since Hornsent is completely obsessed with getting revenge on Marika and Messmer and deposing them, he's willing to go along with Miquella to achieve that end.
He has a very black and white thinking, which is very much facilitated. Like that's something that you know is very much facilitated in cults. You know, people are they have to conform to the group ideology and to be perfect and to fall within that. And that kind of going along also with what's doctrine over person. That's a little bit more true to, I guess you would say, like maybe Marika as opposed to Miquella. But Miquella's is a little bit more loose, but it's also able to cater to this more diverse group of people in a way.
And then there's the final one of the troop, Lita, who is already a fanatical Miquella.
Oh no, leader? I didn't think about that.
Worshipper. And what's interesting with her specifically is like she realizes that Miquella has been bewitching her and just keeps going along with it.
Right.
Because she just instantly, like, so, well, of course, well, yeah, Miquella's bewitched me, whatever, I'm still on Miquella's side. Like, she essentially is apologizing for his behavior. She's rationalizing it.
Mm-hmm.
But what's, like, really interesting about later is that when the bewitching wears off, she's like, well, all right, I was bewitched, but I'm still on Miquella's side. And then she gets paranoid that the other members of this little, like, band of people, they might act differently now that the bewitching has worn off, and she gets concerned that, like, they're gonna go rogue. They're gonna betray Miquella.
So that is something that occurs specifically by design in a lot of cults.
Ooh, I'm really excited to hear more about this, because I guess I didn't think about it from, like, this angle, that it could be more of a cult type mindset or reaction to a cult mindset. Anyway, I just kind of thought it was really funny how self-aware Letta became toward the end of her quest, but not at the very end, that without Miquella's guidance, she was paranoid and quick to kill her comrades. I just thought it was a little bit tragic in a way to be that self-reflective, but just kind of going along with it regardless.
For there to be people that are part of it that gain like kind of a certain status.
So I'm going to back that up. Paisan was saying, wait, you thought the description of Letta's rune implied that she was never bewitched? As far as that's concerned, Letta says to the Tarnished that we seem to be the only one who is unaffected by the lifting of Miquella's spell, so it is very clear, even by her own admission, that she would have been charmed by Miquella herself.
In a lot of cults, is for there to be people that are part of it that gain like kind of a certain status or authority kind of alongside like the leader, or is like considered to be kind of like their right hand or what have you. And that's that whenever the the cult leader is basically unable to kind of oversee things, they know that they've basically trained certain people to essentially do that for them.
Yeah, what was the cult? I think in the 80s, it was 70s or the 80s, that was like in Washington or something like that. And the leader was like kind of like a yogi dude. And his right hand man was a middle-aged woman who just like did all of the dirty work for the cult, which is kind of surprising because she was extremely effective at her job. And the cult just like exploded with popularity, so much so that the government intervened and more or less like killed them. In Osho in Oregon. Thank you, Valkyrie. Appreciate that. Yeah, that was crazy. I managed to catch a documentary on that a couple years ago. I can't believe I never heard of it because, I mean, when I was a kid, Waco, Texas happened, but I was too young to really understand it. I just kind of knew of it and always had like the whole Waco situation burned somewhere in my recollection of events, and the fact that that wasn't the first one, and yeah, anyway, I just did not know about it. You're in Oregon and only heard about it when you were like when you were an adult? What the hell? Yeah. You're gonna have to look it up. Oh, dude, it's absolutely crazy, but extremely fascinating, to be honest. Stellas' power is hard to give up for a lot of people. True story. True story. He was a yogi, kept stealing the picnic baskets. Indeed. Okay, so let's look up into that real quickly just to give you guys a bit of context. Ooh, I should check that out. I think somebody posted the Uzumaki trailer in the Discord. Osho cult, Oregon? Rajneesh cult overran this Oregon town. Okay, so this is a minute. Okay. This might have been what I saw, because I think I saw it on Netflix.
Everybody felt they were there at the beginning of the great experiment. Like we were the chosen.
This doesn't have
people.
captions.
I'm here in one of the largest ranches in the Northwest. Today...
Oh, sorry, it's probably super quiet for you guys. Let me turn this up.
Rajneesh firm because a prominent Indian guru and his followers bought it.
Our vision was to create a community
Based on compassion and sharing.
Bhagwan's agenda was simply to raise the consciousness of humanity. That was his goal.
America was land of promise. It was my conviction we will have no problems.
Did I say she was white? Maybe she wasn't white. Whoopsies.
I don't think America has a place for these people.
Everyone in Antelope mistrusts Rajneesh.
I want that guru and his evil influence out of my city.
They're run by satanic power.
There is talk of vigilantes who may seek revenge on the Rajneeshis.
A bomb went off in the middle of the community.
More than 60 followers evacuated.
It was a catastrophe.
Mostly unjust, terrified.
If I
And right, when I was watching this documentary, it kind of reminded me of just how different a lot of the culture was way back then and how much more Christian the United States was, or maybe that's not the right word. Like, I don't want to say like less secularized, but I'll just say that for anybody who might be like younger in the stream now, like the country is in a vastly different place than where it used to be, especially as far as like acceptance of others is concerned, which really shouldn't be that much of a surprise. But it extends beyond just like race and LGBT and those types of rules of acceptance and whatnot. Culturally overtly Christian, yeah. And then without horns, I don't remember if I said hello, but nice to see you again. The Valkyrie says, Oregon makes a good place for cultists, as much as you hate to say it. You've had broad versions of like various tribalism. The West be wild. It is called Wild Wild Country, huh?
We didn't take measures to protect our community, no one else would do it.
We call upon the governor to disarm this cult's army now.
So if I remember correctly, and this was shown off in the trailer a little bit, but because it's a trailer to go into a ton of detail, the cult kind of like came into the region and they were like literally expanding, building up their kind of camp that you saw. And the locals were not very happy about that for a number of reasons. And so once the Rajneeshis saw the people of the nearby communities start like arming themselves and kind of forming like a de facto militia, they realized that they kind of needed to arm themselves as well, just in case. And then it became an arms race, you know, kind of, but.
If the government does decide to get you, they're going to get you.
Who would poison a whole town?
The Rajneeshis set a stage for a big outbreak to influence the election.
They had no evidence.
They were facing immigration fraud, smuggling.
The Rajneeshis came this close to murdering a presidential appointee.
There is bias, there is prejudgment, religious discrimination, and this is democracy. I've had enough of it.
We were going to mount a full-scale assault.
We will be ready to protect ourselves.
I'd grown up understanding thou shalt not kill. What had happened?
There's darkness in all of us.
So anyway, that kind of gives a pretty quick overview of that entire situation, and the fact that I'd never heard any of this, and would have never heard any of this had it not just been for me, you know, bored scrolling through Netflix one night, is just kind of mind-boggling. And of course there's a lot of other stuff like that in history which we aren't told about very well, and that might go back into the beginning of the video when I was talking about like, oh well, there's kind of propaganda in schools, but I don't really want to talk about that because it's more like a propaganda of omission in many cases, but there is still a lot of overt propaganda as well. But anyway, my point is a lot of the ugly parts of history are glossed over or not even told, either due to like lack of time or lack of interest, which is a bit of a shame because history is truly fascinating when it's coming from a human perspective rather than one of rote memorization and dates and facts. It should be taken together with like a causal relationship because makes it feel a lot more human, essentially. And so, yeah, like that situation was every bit as crazy as Waco in many ways, if not more. Maybe not. I don't really fully remember the differences between the two well enough to comment that directly, I suppose. But anyway, operator just speed read the Wikipedia article, and wow, yeah, exactly. So another kind of crazy thing about history, in case like nobody's ever heard about it, and something that's been pretty completely whitewashed, is the existence of Hoovervilles. If anybody doesn't know what that is, I'll just pull up like a Wikipedia. It's essentially like the US's equivalent to Tiananmen Square, but nobody knows about it. Hoovervilles were shanty towns built during the Great Depression by the homeless in the United States. They are named after Herbert Hoover, who was president. And the term, blah, 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 is about homelessness. So, a notable Hooverville was Anacostia in the District of Columbia, aka Washington, D.C. The Bonus Army, a group of World War I veterans seeking expedited benefits, established a Hooverville in 1932. Many of these men came from afar illegally by riding on railroad freight trains to join the movement. At its maximum, there were 15,000 people living there. The camp was demolished by units of the U.S. Army commanded by General Douglas MacArthur. So, essentially, the veterans of World War I were not being taken care of, and so they came to DC trying to get some benefits or some remunerations for some of the complications of their service or whatever happened. And so they built a shanty town within Washington, D.C. itself, which was literally torn down by the army. So, I mean, it's not exactly like Tiananmen Square, but I mean, as far as comparing what the symbols of each kind of represent, it isn't that far off, I suppose. You don't think Tiananmen Square is a good parallel? Maybe not, but I just mean like this is probably one of the ugliest parts of U.S. history that's just been kind of swept under the rug. So I'm not trying to say like the events are exactly the same. I'm just saying that there are some parallels that we just don't learn about. Without Horn says, every time someone says this has been more or less left out of U.S. history, you gain a lot more respect for your history teachers for going over that exact thing. Nice. We've had a lot worse than that. Well, I mean, certainly if you want to like bring in things like the Trail of Tears, but my point is, at least you've heard of the Trail of Tears, and of course there's been a lot of other awful things to go along with that. So anyway, my point is that at least with like the Hoovervilles, it is a lot more recent than other things that were equally terrible. But anyway, that's way off topic. So let's get back to the video.
There's a lot of like purging and like, you know, it sets you up to be paranoid. Like you feel that you're always being watched and that people are going to find out, and like that's an element of what makes it really hard to be able to get out. You're being watched all the time, and people will turn against you. And then there are going to be people that are never going to fall out of that mindset.
The other interesting thing about Leda is that she gets paranoid literally about Saint Trina, who is Miquella. Mm-hmm. So it's like she's so into Miquella that she begins to distrust parts of Miquella that don't align with who Miquella is supposed to be.
Deep down.
All right, so I'm going to back it up just a bit and address Korn's comment. And he said Japanese internment camps in World War II are pretty crazy and more recent. Yeah, I am definitely not trying to downplay anything pertaining to the internment camps instituted in the U.S. and the types of practices and beliefs that went on to establish them to begin with. But at the very least, I would say that the internment camps are covered a bit, and there is still that kind of cultural recognition of those facts, whereas things like the Hoovervilles are a bit more just swept under the rug out of like disinterest or not wanting people to realize like what had happened and why they came to be the way that they were and why things are the way that they are. And right, like a lot of the stuff with the internment camps and even things like eugenics definitely do have ties to terrible practices done in the US.
Paranoid literally about Saint Trina, who is Miquella.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like she's so into Miquella that she begins to distrust parts of Miquella that don't align with who Miquella is supposed to be.
Deep down, like you understand that you've been deceived, but you're beyond the point of being able to like face that and kind of accept it. And it kind of reminds me of like people that fall victim to cults or even are like maybe duped or scammed or what have you. Yeah, it's really difficult for people to when they've been duped and then are seeing kind of like what they've followed and kind of fell for. It's really hard for them to kind of admit that.
Yeah, so like of all of the people in the DLC that Miquella has like openly bewitched, kind of the only one that he really needed to seriously do some like thought control to was Ansbach.
Yeah.
Everyone else was like so close to following Miquella or already following Miquella, and he just kind of gave them a tiny little push. And they've all got their own reasons for doing it, whether it's like they had a personal experience or he represents like something politically advantageous for them.
Right, which
I feel like the Freya would have had a lot more anti-Miquella feelings if it weren't for the Scarlet Rot. So I feel like Miquella did a little bit more than a push, but maybe if they're just kind of all considered the same event, I could see why you might call it a little push at that point. I'm trying to think. Aside from Ansbach, I do think the Horn Scent would have been a really big push. Maybe Sophie said the Horn Scent, and maybe I just missed it.
This brings up a kind of a point in the whole like authoritarianism and totalism, is that whenever you're in like a climate where there's a lot of divide, it's going to be much easier. Because I'm looking at it and I'm kind of like with Ansbach, for example. The thing that's really distinct about him and about his character is that he's the one that has had the most lived experience. And
yeah, he specifically calls himself out as being old.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah, I would. Now that he said it, so yeah, he's the old one. He's the old fart. He's the one that saint shit. So yeah, he has that, and that's actually really key to being able to also kind of spot these kinds of things. That's a vulnerability factor in a lot of cases, which is why it's really important to have kind of like a strong support system and being an ally to people and kind of helping them with it.
So that brings us to Miquella himself and kind of what Miquella is offering these people in terms of a worldview.
We'll just think happy thoughts and it will all be okay. Join hands.
Yeah.
Hug and make up. Do it.
Because Miquella being like a child kind of informs his view of the world. Like we were just talking about, Ansbach is the one who's able to like question things because Ansbach is old. Miquella is technically probably older than Ansbach because he's like immortal god baby, but he still has like the mindset of a child when you...
As far as that anime picture, I'm a little bit disappointed it's not like Kurama from Yu Yu Hakusho.
You sort of hear about what he's doing, like, which has like, it's not a case of having like that solely being a negative thing.
Right.
Like the fact that he sees like his sister is suffering from an illness and he just like puts his foot down and goes, no, and throws everything he can into healing her. Like, that's admirable, but it's also it's also indicative of someone who is on a certain level, like, a little petulant and incapable of accepting that, like, things sometimes go wrong.
And you could even say it's a little bit Machiavellian in nature to literally try to upend nature and conquer it and fix that which is kind of like a malady, I suppose.
And there's Godwin, the die a true death. And then technically, in the way that he has sort of this admiration for Radon, you know, this is my badass brother, blah, blah, yeah. Like, it's kind of like that. Because even whenever you see the cutscene that's at the end, it's this kid that's like kind of bent down. It's like, promise me. Like, it's very much like, yeah, my brother's gonna come beat you up. Like, it totally has that.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that makes it really difficult. So I'm trying to remember, like, how many people have, drew the conclusions, because of course visually there are definitely ones, because obviously a Griffith.
Yeah.
I think that possibly there was a sigh of relief when I was like, oh, and I told you, I was like, oh, so Rosine, and you're like, oh, thank God.
So when, like you were saying, so a lot of people were like, oh, yeah, I know what they're going to do with Miquella. They're going to Griffith it.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing I kept pointing out about Miquella is, like, Miquella's not evil. Miquella's naive.
Mm-hmm.
So what they ended up doing is, like, it's a partial Griffithing, but it's mostly a Rosining.
Yeah.
One of the things about Miquella's story, which has kind of been stuck in my mind for a while, and I don't know how many people are going to be familiar with this anymore, but there's an episode of Twilight Zone where essentially there is this town that is run by a tyrant dictator who's only like 12 years old or something like that, or maybe he's like 9 or 10. Anyway, this is a very young child that has this entire town at his thrall and his beck and call, because this child in particular has immense psychic powers and nobody else in the town does. So it's essentially set, Twilight Zone style in the 50s, black and white, where this kid is in a town in the real world, essentially, except he has magical powers. Now, what do you expect a child with magical powers to do back in, like, 1950s America? He more or less just tortures these townsfolk and does terrible things to the townsfolk that he doesn't like, and transforms them into different things, or just makes them disappear from reality completely. And the only townsfolk that are left are all yes men who will capitulate to every one of his demands. And so I don't think Miquella is quite at that level compared to the Twilight Zone episode, but there is a kind of kinship between that episode and that child, I think, and to Miquella's overall qualities as a character, which I find very interesting. That episode is so good. It really is, though. If you guys have not seen it, I highly recommend that episode of Twilight Zone. Actually, like, I will just recommend Twilight Zone in general. Not every episode is amazing, I will say that much, but it's got a certain level of charm and retrofuturism to it, a real wistfulness, and from a time that was able to, like, look at the future and imagine a lot more possibilities, just because of them kind of in many ways being more ignorant of, like, technology in general and making the world a lot smaller. Like, the world was a lot bigger back then. So imagine, if you will. Exactly. Oh yeah, that's true. The Emperor of all the Universe is a little alien kid in Dragon Ball Super. So yeah, as far as, like, the indigenous cultures and things like Sundown Towns go, like, a lot of that stuff is going to be touched upon more in places like the South and the Southwest, where those practices were more common, whereas in certain aspects of the North, at the very least, a lot of that stuff wasn't touched upon because it wasn't as relevant as other parts. And yeah. All right, let's go on with the vidya.
In Berserk, probably one of the most probably the second most disturbing part for a lot of people is a part that's called the Lost Children arc. It's really short and it's kind of separate from everything else, like insofar as kind of like standing on its own, but it represents something that's really important to the story overall. Basically, Rosine is a child that is a part of this village. She became an apostle after experiencing abuse from her parents, and there were a lot of children that were in this village that were also, had abusive parents as well. And so there were others that kind of followed Rosine's lead to kind of escape that. But because of, becoming an apostle being a very malevolent thing, inherently, because of what it's connected to, even though she is still a child, and the way that she is going about it, and not understanding the consequences of things and what they imply. Like, for example, the thing that is so disturbing about specifically within that story is when they are, I guess, playing war and they're just mimicking the adults that they see and killing each other and doing other things with stingers. And it's really disturbing, but they're just like, oh, we're just playing like the adults. It's just play, it's just pretend. And they're so detached from it because it hasn't registered with them because it wouldn't at that point. And it's also there was something that I read of somebody kind of referring to it as sort of like also a Peter Pan thing as well.
Yeah.
But yet Miquella doesn't have the ability to understand why, and that's really, I think, what more so what Saint Trina was like operating as.
So about this stuff here, so I've been doing some like research into like gifted children and things like that, and apparently one common difference for gifted children is to have a lot of fixations on things like the concepts of death and eternity when they're children, and they're very acutely aware of cause and effect, whereas a lot of non-gifted children don't really pick up on that kind of thing until they're older. And so I wonder how much of this like rings true for you guys. Like when you were children, did you not really understand like the concepts of like war? And obviously like sex is its own topic that has its own, well, how do I explain this? It's like, I don't expect children to understand sex and like everything that goes along with that. So leaving that aspect of the child play alone, I'm just curious about like how you guys felt or how well you understood those concepts of like death and war and fighting as children. Because for me, that kind of explanation about children just didn't really ever sit well with me, because when I was a kid, I was acutely aware of things like death and war and like the suffering that came along with it. And I just cannot conceive of a time where somebody is like so oblivious to that unless they had truly never experienced like any death at that point in their lives. So anyway, Paisan understood far too much at a young age, for better or worse. My condolences, my man. Understandable. It's interesting. It maybe explains why you've been obsessed with death since you were 3. Yeah, when the first day I was going to kindergarten, I cried, which is not atypical for a child to cry when they go to kindergarten. But I was crying in the car on the way to go to school, not because I didn't want to go to school, but because I was having an existential crisis, because I didn't want to die. which is not typically why children would be crying in the car on the way to go to school for the first time ever. But anyway, yeah. Oh yeah, that's a good point, Corn. 80s cartoons and kid movies did a fantastic job of introducing deep concepts to kids. Hilka remembers in kindergarten existential crisis about the school fish dying. My condolences. Valkyrie had weird death dreams and stuff, so you felt like you thought about it more than your peers, but you have a younger sibling who didn't really even give it much thought at a later age, despite losing your mom. You don't know. That sucks. She's like super smart. She graduated a year early as valedictorian, so you're not saying you're more gifted or anything. Pour one out for Artax. Man, it's even more messed up in the book, if you believe it or not, because Artax can talk and is like, I don't want to be here, essentially, but a lot more tragic than my fake like Brooklyn accent, whatever it was. Dylan remembers being 3 and your mom saying people die, and you asked, even George Washington? And it blew your mind when she said yes, and you got depressed realizing the man on the dollar was gone now. That's rough, man. Him and the cherry tree. Joji found a dead bird, and you understood that when things die, their eyes don't close. Without Horns, sort of understood about death around 3rd grade. Hard to say about anything else, but you're basically in a prolonged existential crisis from the age of 13 to the end of high school. And then Paisan had their mom tell them about multiple times you discussed death, afterlife, existentialism, and so on, even at 4 to 5 years old. Okay, so I really do wonder if this is just a lot of adults not really understanding the psyche of children, or like not giving them as much credit as I think they should have. And that was something which always infuriated me as a kid. Just like a lot of the dismissive attitude or condescending remarks that people would have about children in general. Because as a kid, I always felt extremely frustrated at being dismissed due to age. And that's something that I never want to do to anybody for age, which is kind of ironic because I'm like, you kids these days, you should watch your Twilight Zones and stuff like that. But obviously I'm talking about completely different experiences here. Maybe the trick is that kids obsessed with death play Elden Ring as adults. Maybe. I mean, I'm certain that our target demographic might not be the broadest slice of the demographics available. So anyway, thank you all for answering so candidly. I truly appreciate that. So let's go back to the video.
Was the insight and wisdom that was there.
Absolutely.
To be able to, understand that this is not how this works. Like, you can't just, you can't just make people like each other and force them and take away their free will. But he doesn't say it that way.
And that's like the whole thing about Trina being this like older, wiser part of himself.
Mm-hmm.
He's like going, and he's literally getting a part of himself he doesn't want to deal with, and he's burying it.
Mm-hmm.
Which is
all right. So when I was talking about that kid in that episode of Twilight Zone, I knew I didn't finish the story the way that I wanted to. Now I remembered where I wanted to go with it. So part of the reason why I bring up that kid in the episode of Twilight Zone is that he was oblivious to the desires of like the adults around him for wanting to live a normal life, not under the thumb of a would-be magical tyrant, essentially. So that idea in and of itself kind of helps color my perspective of what Miquella is and how he may view the wills of other individuals. Because Miquella is a demigod and has the power to charm people to do things which might be better for the world, he might not be capable of respecting the concept of free will as it pertains to others, because his is the more right and the more true way, which is why he wants us to stand aside so he may embrace the world to put it to rights.
Which is something a lot of people do.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I'm on board with it. My only issue is that she stays buried and doesn't actually do anything.
I mean, she is a plant.
I know.
It's really far down there.
Yeah, maybe if they just keep growing upward, just creep out of the hole. Miquella is also called out specifically by Ansbach as, like, the immaturity is the source of the problem.
Oh, he says that?
Well, one of the things Ansbach says is, like, Miquella's taken Moog's corpse.
Oh, yeah, he doesn't understand how he's, like, yeah, how...
Yeah, because it's not Miquella stole Moog's corpse. Oh my god, what a horrible thing to do. It's like, Miquella stole Moog's corpse, and I don't think he actually understands what is so messed up about having done that.
Mm-hmm.
Ansbach does call Miquella a monster at one point. But, like,
yeah,
he also it's in the context of, like, this kid is really, really frightening. Rather than, he's not a monster like Rykard or Godric. He is just, like, incredibly frightening that he can just, like, steal people's, like, he can just compel people to do things.
And I really like what Sophie's kind of building on here a lot, because that, I think, goes back into what I was talking about with that Twilight Zone episode, where there's a certain inhuman element to somebody who cannot interact meaningfully with the world on the same level as other people. And of course, like, contrasting Miquella to Rykard, I think, is particularly brilliant, because Rykard knowingly made his choice and delved into blasphemy by his own will, whereas Miquella probably is just unconcerned with the wills of others entirely, and you can't really commune with somebody like that. There's like a facade in front of your eyes, perhaps, and you never truly, like, penetrate to comprehension, if that makes sense.
I think that whole thing really ties into, like, Miquella as an eternal child.
Mm-hmm.
He is so powerful that he never actually has to go through any of the things that make you mature.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because, like, this is all going back to his whole, like...
Yeah, tying it back to maturity is also a great point, because he is a child, and it just stands to reason that if you are a child, you're going to be immature. And then to say that because he's also so powerful, that will stifle his maturity, makes a lot of sense as well, and, you know, goes back to the whole Twilight Zone parallel. He lacks empathy. I don't know if he, like, lacks empathy exactly. Like, I know what you're saying, and I don't think you're wrong, but I think there's a nuance to it that I can't quite hit on, because if I were to try and describe it, I think I would be inadvertently describing empathy and sound like an idiot. So, like, he's empathetic. He tries to cure millennia of scarlet rot. He says that he wants a better world, but maybe that's more sympathetic than empathetic, but he might not truly understand people. So maybe you're kind of right there. I don't know. And then Hilko says, you don't know, you identify a lot with Miquella, especially from your autism perspective. Big empathy, but solves things with somewhat childish, idealized solutions. Interesting. I don't know how to approach that, and not just because, like, I'm like, oh, autism, I don't know what to talk about. No, I'm just trying to think about that, like, directly here. Because not to be, like, condescending, because I truly don't mean it to come across this way, but I think that's kind of tragic that you want to act to do something better, but you're also kind of burdened with the knowledge that your actions might not be the proper ones to take due to a fundamental difference with the way that you interact with the world than other people do, which, that's got to be really messed up. Let's keep an eye on this one, yeah. But to say that they're somewhat childish, idealized solutions is very interesting to me. So this will sound really weird and maybe a little bit messed up in some ways, but just bear with me and hopefully it'll make sense by the end of everything. So even though I'm pretty confident that I'm not autistic, I think that when I was in my formative years, I took on a lot of autistic traits because I thought a lot of the way in which society operated was built on a lot of like false pretenses, which I saw as being very disingenuous, and I grew a lot of disdain for. So that kind of like messed me up for a while growing up there. And so in many ways I became a bit more robotic, like stereotypes of autistic people, but I've always understood like the emotions of others and the motivations behind them quite well, which is at odds with what I understand autistic people experience the world like. So in many ways, I can very easily commiserate with how autistic people approach the world, because my excuse me, my preferred approach in many ways would be kind of similar to that, where you're a lot more direct about things, but obviously a lot of people dislike that for many reasons, which have their merits, but I don't want to get into right now because it's already going off topic quite a bit. But it would definitely suck to not have the tools to like work around that. So I don't know what to say other than my condolences. And then operator, welcome back in. And then Valkyrie said that their bipolar feels somewhere in between sometimes, depending on your mood state. Dylan says, as someone diagnosed autistic, that makes sense. Okay. So, yeah. Anyway, let's move on.
Like Scarlet Rot Golden Needle thing, where it's like, the Scarlet Rot has completely destroyed an entire continent. Mm-hmm. It also kind of destroyed like a huge part of the Eternal Cities. It's just sunk into this swamp, right?
So as far as Joji's comment goes, I wouldn't call them like mentally ill, because that implies that they should be better. And I understand you might not necessarily mean it to come across that way, and I don't want to like try and tone police people too much, but I would like to draw that kind of distinction. And I do think in some ways, even though it's a bit annoying trying to constantly like update your lexicon for things which are constantly changing, I would say that I definitely don't think autism is a mental illness, because it's, you know, part genetic and whatnot. So neurodivergent would probably be a better term there. But yeah, I'll back this up.
Destroyed an entire continent. Mm-hmm. It also kind of destroyed like a huge part of the Eternal Cities. It's just sunk into this swamp, right? And the Golden Order, which is like the principle upon which this whole world is functioning, couldn't stop the Scarlet Rot. And Miquella's first like really significant thing he does in the story is he manages to stop the Scarlet Rot. Mm-hmm. So it's like, he doesn't have to deal with the fact that something he wants to do might not work, because it always has worked out because he's so powerful.
Yeah, and just the whole, you know, oh, you can be our friend. That just kind of makes me think of everybody like going to, just you can come to the Holly Tree, you can be my friend. I have a tree house. you won't get bullied anymore. And little froggies, they never fucking got there. That's sad. They just cartwheeled off into the fucking blood. Like, they cartwheeled off into the fucking Cannibal Corpse album.
But I think it's kind of interesting that like they did end up there, because the way that you get to Mogwin Palace is that you go in the wrong direction when you're going to the Erdtree. So like they were following Miquella, and they actually found where Miquella was. He's just in Mogwin. So that it actually kind
That's
of
that's when you grow up too fast.
Yeah. Literally, he's huge.
Like, oh, we didn't want to see it like that.
The interesting part to me, like contrasting Miquella with the other like demigods, is that like to me the most interesting contrast there's actually with Melina. You don't think of Melina as a demigod because she's not a boss that you fight. She doesn't have a rune or anything, but like it was like reasonably clear in the base game that she was one of Marika's children. And the DLC like outright confirms it by saying that like Messmer was her older brother. Melina has been through a lot of shit, if you accept, even if you don't like follow the whole like Melina's a Glomite Queen thing, like she's still someone who has been like burned up.
Yeah.
Like she's lost her physical body, she's lost most of her memory and her identity, and she's just kind of like stumbling around.
And then she goes and sets herself on fire again. Willingly, eagerly, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
She's been burnt once and be like, yeah, I'll just be burnt again. Like, oof, that's seeing shit and jump back in it. Yeah.
And like she literally says, like, I've observed the lands between for a very long time. And she reaches the conclusion that like basically things need to start dying.
Yeah.
Marika's made everything go wrong by binding destined death in Farum Azula. But the other thing about Melina is like she's not like murder happy McGee when she's talking about death. Like the fact that she talks about death and that she wants indiscriminate death to come back to the world, that doesn't mean that she's like actually into like murdering people in this kind of nihilistic way.
Right.
Because she gives this speech when you're at the base of where the Frenzied Flame is, where she basically says like the whole world is completely fucked up. Everything's broken and there's no way to fix it. But that doesn't mean that life is meaningless.
Right.
Like, people continue to live and struggle and become and thrive and love each other, even though the world has gone to shit, and that makes the world worth preserving.
Yeah.
Whereas Miquella's approach is to say the world has gone to shit and it's only going to get better if I step in and I fix absolutely everything. And Miquella's weirdly closer to the Frenzied Flame. He's kind of standing aside and going, make everything, like, just flatten everything out again.
That's an interesting way of saying it. I don't know if I'd agree with that. I can kind of see what she's saying here, but I'm a little reticent to go along with it.
You apply Miquella's solution to everything, it undoes what Melina's talking about, because like it's no longer to do with the people, it's no longer to do with what makes you unique as a person that's drawing you toward other things that are unique. It's like, I'm compelling you to all do this. Miquella is like removing that agency from things and saying, no, I'm going to make them come together.
He doesn't understand the value in overcome the hardship and the struggle.
Yeah, and that again ties it back to this whole idea of like the Miquella thing is way more cult-like, because everything's compelled, everything's coerced. There's one totalizing answer to everything.
That's the black and white thinking. I mean, basically there's no room for there to be anything else outside of it. And the thing is that he's still acting in a very human way. And there is something about there's some probably a few characters that have probably said, you know, these are men that are becoming gods, or like basically the faults of like humans or what have you.
Yeah, they talk about like the problem with the gods is like it's pettiness that's like basically human love.
Oh, I'm glad Sophie picked that up because I was really confused. So this is like getting at the gold mask thing. Okay.
Levels of pettiness.
Yeah.
They call it the fly in the ointment.
Yeah. That's from
Gold mask.
Yeah. I guess kind of the way that it would be framed in the game, and then also in just other contexts, that something that is a god or of the supernatural being isn't going to be concerned with things that are of that sort. Like they're gonna be beyond that. Just they're over it, right?
Now that I'm thinking about it, the gods know better than men in relation to Miquella is kind of fascinating because in many ways Miquella is kind of like the most divine being of them all. And because of that, he really doesn't face the same kind of issues that other people are facing, as Sophie was talking about earlier.
Whereas it's a very human response and emotion.
Okay, thank you very much, Troubled Maker.
Oh, that's it? Okay.
Thank you. Had a good time. We've seen some shit.
I did too. Yeah, we did. We have.
Good too.
And I'll link your channel where you've got a lot of Elden Ring free cam footage you've been doing in the video description if people want to check that out.
Yep. I mean, and one day there might, because I'm just kind of learning how to do all that kind of stuff, and I like to put things together for people or whatever. It's just, it's something for me to do. But that's probably not what my channel is going to be about whenever and if that happens ever. So yeah, but I do like to tinker. I do make some stuff.
Cool.
Yeah, I do computer.
Thank you very much.
No problem. Beep.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and share the video with you guys as per usual. And there it is there. Now, earlier in the stream, Valkyrie was saying that she was thinking about potentially making some videos about cults. I'm curious, do you have like an active channel or anything like that? Or is this just like a pipe dream? Because content creation really isn't that bad. I mean, there are definitely things to learn, but I do recommend people at least looking into it and giving it a shot if they really do want to get some of their ideas out there. Dylan liked that video a lot. That was a good one. It really was. Yeah, so obviously we don't cover a ton of Sinclair lore on this channel, which is just because it's hard to get to everybody, and they've been producing a little bit less focused content on like the Soulsborne stuff, although I did see Castle of the Winds when I was like looking at their channel the other day, and I was like, oh man, I remember that game. I was surprised to see any coverage of it in 2024. I remember that old game. Anyway, it's not too important. So they've been moving away from FromSoft stuff a bit more, branching out. So I've just kind of looked at the channel a little bit less as a result of that. So anyway, yeah. Valkyrie already has an overview of the bite model, but you haven't applied it to fiction, and only through comparing problematic creators so far? Ooh, interesting. Elden Ring stuff on your channel is mostly you ranting about people saying Gurm didn't do much. Oh, hey, I'm one of them. Let's pull a little creep move and check out your channel. Because if you have content, I might want to look into it. Just for funsies. Another Elden rant? Maybe this isn't the best for stream then, if it's all ranting. You said you had something on bite? The bite model. Maybe I should add that to the list. What is the bite model? Okay, so at the very beginning of the stream, there had been a bit of an infographic on the page that talked about the bite model, which is about cults, or damn it, what was the term that she used? High demand groups. The bite model of authoritarian control. Now, obviously, I don't have a strong insight into this, and if we had more time, I might have like watched Valkyrie's video on this right now, but we're kind of running toward the end of the stream as it is. So it's a way to control behavior, information, thought, and the emotions of people within an in-group, and to make out-groups, and to kind of centralize power between the in-group and keep somebody indoctrinated in your in-group. A lot of it is doing learning curve things. That's totally understandable. I mean, I'm not trying to like shout you out so much as, you know, just be interested in a bunch of different topics. And if you're covering something that I'm interested in, I would just be inclined to look at it. And then Valkyrie said, Steve Hassan created the Bite model after joining and leaving the Moonies cult. Interesting. Yeah, there's a lot more about cult psychology that I would like to learn, unironically speaking, but it's a little bit difficult finding good resources. So maybe having something like this to start steering me into a more positive direction will be helpful for that. So I might like start looking into this more into the future. But it stands for behavior, information, thought, and emotional control. I have big plans for us. Oh yeah? No. I'm just very interested in like psychology, sociology, education, and all of that kind of thing. And Nightbot's calling me out. So anyway, I don't really think we have enough time for another video, so I might just end things a little bit early for tonight. And I was thinking of potentially watching another video by Fat Brett. I don't remember which one we watched. I think we watched the Mesmer one, and I think he had one on Miquella that I might want to look at tomorrow on stream. So I'll figure it out and whatnot. So that's what we'll do. So tomorrow we'll be going live at the same time of 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I hope I'll catch you all then. So until then, take care, stay safe. Last Protagonist out.